Imagine yourself as Lucius Coruncanius, a Roman envoy standing within the barbaric court of Queen Teuta, ruler of the Adriatic. You've just committed a critical error. Your mission isn't one of negotiation, but of issuing ultimatums to the pirate queen. The atmosphere is heavy with unspoken tension. You sneer at her, declaring that if she fails to control her people, Rome will personally instruct her on how to govern. You anticipate her cowering response. Instead, a chillingly sparse smile graces her lips, an expression that fails to reach her eyes. With a casual flick of her hand, she dismisses you. You turn sharply, confident your threat has made its impact as you stride back towards your vessel. The sun glints off the Adriatic, but your attention is diverted by the glint of steel as an assassin emerges from the shadows of the ship's hull. A searing pain rips across your throat. Your choked gurgle of blood spills onto the wooden deck as the Queen's guards observe, impassive. You are the first Roman diplomat to be brutally slain in decades. As your vision blurs, you realize you've just ignited a conflict with the most formidable mariners of the ancient world, the Illyrians. Before we delve into these forgotten tales of hardship and resilience, if you find yourself enjoying explorations into history's concealed truths, consider liking this video and subscribing for more such content. Please leave a comment indicating your listening location. I find it truly remarkable that we're collectively exploring these ancient narratives from various corners of the globe, united by our shared fascination with the past. That act of violence in 230 BC was more than just a crime. It was a direct affront to the Mediterranean's burgeoning superpower. Rome had just concluded its subjugation of Carthage in the First Punic War, and the Senate was basking in the glow of victory. They viewed the Mediterranean as their personal domain, considering the tribes across the Adriatic Sea mere annoyances, like gnats around a lion's head. However, these were no ordinary gnats. While Roman legions honed their land combat skills, the Illyrians were revolutionizing naval warfare. Operating from the rugged, island-strewn coast of what is now Dalmatia, they had transformed piracy into a state-sanctioned enterprise. Their raids weren't solely for riches, they were for survival. The rocky terrain of the Balkans offered little for large-scale agriculture, so they exploited the sea. Every merchant vessel traversing the routes from Greece to Italy had to navigate their hunting grounds. Under King Agron, the Ardeae tribe had consolidated these desperate raiding parties into a formidable confederation. Agron was a warlord of the old school, brutal, charismatic, and prone to excessive indulgence in undiluted wine. Following a significant triumph over the Atlians, his celebrations were so extravagant that he contracted uremia and died within days. This elevated his wife, Teuta, to the throne. Rome perceived this as an opportune moment. Receiving reports of Italian merchants being forcibly removed from their ships and sold into servitude, the Senate assumed a widowed regent would be easily intimidated. They dispatched the brothers Lucius and Marcus Cornelius, two aristocrats brimming with Roman arrogance, to Scodra. The encounter was a clash of fundamentally incompatible worldviews. The Romans demanded that Teuta immediately cease her subjects' piratical activities. Teuta regarded them with genuine bewilderment. Within Illyrian culture, piracy was a legitimate livelihood, akin to fishing or pottery making. She explained that it was not the practice of kings to obstruct their subjects from acquiring plunder. The younger Cornelius, Marcus, lost his temper. He insulted her, her laws, and implicitly threatened an invasion. He treated her as a subordinate vassal, not a sovereign ruler. Teuta did not erupt in fury. She simply decided that this Roman insolence warranted a permanent resolution. When news of the assassination reached Rome, the Senate was struck into stunned silence. The murder of an envoy was a profound violation of ius gentium, the sacred law of nations that protected diplomats, even amidst conflict. It was such a blatant and personal act of aggression that it precluded any political deliberation. Legions were mobilized and the fleet was dispatched. Rome prepared to annihilate the barbarian queen. Yet, as the formidable Roman quinqueremes navigated the Adriatic, they confronted a terrifying reality. They were not engaging a disorganized mob, but sailing into a treacherous maze, guarded by a people intimately familiar with every current, hidden cove, and method of dispatching a lumbering adversary. To comprehend how the demise of a single diplomat could escalate into an international crisis, we must shift our gaze from Rome's marble edifices to the rugged spine of the ancient Balkans. The kingdom of the Ardii bore no resemblance to any civilization familiar to the Romans. There were no grand forums, no extensive paved roads, and no senates engaged in philosophical discourse. Instead, the Illyrian power base was hewn directly from the living rock of the Dalmatian coast. Geography is destiny, and this was never more evident than in Illyria. The Dinaric Alps form a colossal, impassable barrier separating the coastline from the hinterland. For Roman generals, this terrain presented a logistical nightmare of choke points and ambush opportunities. However, for pirates, it was a natural fortress. The coastline itself is a fractured tapestry of over 1,000 islands, secluded inlets, and deep, winding fjords. A vessel could vanish into this labyrinth in mere seconds, concealed from pursuers by towering limestone cliffs that plunged vertically into the sea. This harsh environment dictated their economy. The soil of the coast was meager, yielding scant wheat or olive oil. Survival necessitated looking seaward, towards the lucrative trade routes connecting Greece and Italy. For the tribes inhabiting this region, raiding was not a moral failing, but a fundamental necessity. They harvested the merchant fleets much as a farmer cultivates his fields. Over centuries, this necessity evolved into a sophisticated culture of predation. The Ardii kingdom rose to prominence by mastering this environment. Under the late King Agron, the disparate tribes were unified into a formidable state apparatus. Agron didn't merely lead raids, he levied taxes on them. He established a system where local chieftains provided ships and warriors in exchange for a share of the spoils and protection. It was a geopolitical protection racket akin to the mafia. Upon Teuta's assumption of the regency for her young stepson Pin, she inherited this volatile machine. Her position was far more precarious than the Romans realized. Within the hyper-masculine warrior culture of the Illyrians, a leader maintained power solely through the equitable distribution of wealth. Had Teuta capitulated to Roman demands and ceased piracy, she would have severed the flow of gold and slaves that ensured her chieftain's loyalty. The moment she ordered the fleets to stand down, she would have faced a mutiny. Her refusal to Cornelius was not mere defiance. It was a strategic calculation for political survival. Teuta had to demonstrate her capacity to fill Agron's shoes. She authorized aggressive southward expansion, targeting the wealthy Greek colonies dotting the coast. Her commanders laid siege to the island of Issa and assaulted the city of Epidamnos. These were not haphazard skirmishes. The Illyrians employed siege engines, coordinated infantry movements, and psychological warfare. They instilled fear in the Greeks, not only through their violence, but also through their discipline. The court at Skodra mirrored this martial focus. It was a place where wine flowed as freely as blood. The Illyrians were renowned, or perhaps infamous, throughout antiquity for their drinking culture. Even the Greeks, fond of their wine, were appalled by the Illyrian custom of consuming unmixed wine in vast quantities, leading to boisterous feasts where commerce and violence frequently intertwined. It was within this atmosphere of intoxicated aggression that Teuta held court, surrounded by warriors who measured a leader's worth by the terror they could inflict upon their enemies. Rome perceived a barbarian woman. In reality, they were confronting a cornered predator. Teuta commanded a network of fortified harbors stretching from modern-day Split down to Dyrrhachium. Her pirate empire functioned as a nimble, decentralized hydra. One could raise a village or sink a fleet, but the hydra would simply retreat into the mountains or slip behind an island, awaiting the storm's passage. The Romans were bringing a hammer to swat a swarm of wasps. They were about to discover that brute force is futile when your adversary refuses to engage predictably. When the Roman navy finally launched its retaliatory campaign, they deployed the heavyweight champions of the Mediterranean, the quinqueremes. These were floating fortresses propelled by nearly 300 oarsmen designed to ram enemy hulls with the force of a battering ram. A single Roman vessel was an engineering marvel, carrying 120 marines prepared to board and annihilate any opposition. This strategy of overwhelming force had proven effective against Carthage. However, the Adriatic was not the open sea, and the Illyrians had no interest in a conventional engagement. Deep within the shipyards of the Liburnians, a tribe celebrated for their naval ingenuity, the Illyrians had perfected a weapon that would irrevocably alter maritime history: the liberne. If the Roman quinquereme was a sledgehammer, the liberne was a switchblade. It was small, undecked, and powered by a single bank of oars, typically manned by only 50 individuals. It lacked a heavy ram, towering forecastles, and substantial armor. To a Roman admiral, it appeared as a mere trifle. This underestimation proved fatal. The liberne possessed a singular attribute that the Romans could not replicate: speed. These vessels were designed with a shallow draft, enabling them to navigate hidden reefs and disappear up shallow river deltas where the cumbersome Roman galleys would inevitably run aground. In the turbulent, unpredictable waters of the Dalmatian coast, the liburnes danced while the Roman quinqueremes faltered. The Illyrian tactics constituted a form of naval guerrilla warfare. They never lined up for the decisive, set-piece battles that the Romans favored. Instead, they operated in wolf packs. 4 or 5 liburnes would descend upon a single, isolated Roman transport. They didn't ram, they swarmed. Utilizing their agility, they would pull alongside, lash the vessels together, and flood the enemy deck with fierce warriors before the Romans could even reposition their heavy ballast. It was a brutal equation. A Roman warship was incredibly expensive to construct and took months to crew. An Illyrian liberne could be built in weeks using local timber and crewed by any village's fishermen. Teuta could lose 10 ships to sink 1 Roman vessel and still emerge with a net advantage. This naval technology was so effective that it instilled terror throughout the merchant world. The liburnes did not confine their operations to the Adriatic. Raids were reported as far south as the Peloponnese. The Illyrians had democratized naval aggression. One did not require a state treasury to menace an empire. A swift vessel and 50 hungry men sufficed. Rome found itself grappling with a phantom. Legions would land on an island, only to discover the villages deserted and the Illyrian fleet already departed, sailing downwind to raid the very supply lines the Romans had just abandoned. The seemingly invincible Roman navy was bleeding from 1,000 minor wounds, unable to apprehend an enemy that refused to adhere to the conventions of civilized warfare. The Senate belatedly realized they were not fighting a nation, but a methodology. To prevail, they would require more than just wood and iron, they would need deceit. In 229 BC, the Roman Republic abandoned its futile attempts to swat at flies and resolved to burn down the forest. The Senate sanctioned a force of terrifying magnitude: 200 warships and 20,000 infantry, led simultaneously by both consuls. This was not a punitive expedition, it was an annihilation force. The sheer displacement of water caused by the Roman fleet as it traversed the Strait of Otranto sent a palpable message vibrating through the wooden hulls of every Illyrian vessel. The game was concluded, but the Illyrian wars would not be decided by a clash of prows or a hail of arrows. They would be determined in the mind of one man, Demetrius of Pharus. Demetrius was Queen Teuta's most capable general, entrusted with the defense of Corcyra, modern-day Corfu, a strategic linchpin of the Adriatic. He commanded a garrison that could have sustained a siege for months, systematically draining Roman supply lines. However, Demetrius possessed a trait common among successful pirates: a complete absence of loyalty, prioritizing only his own survival. As the Roman armada darkened the horizon, obscuring the morning sun, Demetrius performed his calculations. He observed Teuta's regency crumbling under the weight of her own ambition. He recognized Rome's inexhaustible resources and perceived an opportunity. Instead of ordering his archers to man the ramparts, he dispatched a small boat towards the Roman flagship. The agreement was forged in hushed tones. Demetrius surrendered Corcyra without a single drop of blood being shed. In return, the Romans pledged to install him as a client king, governing the very islands he had once defended for Teuta. This was a masterstroke of Roman statecraft. They had not merely defeated the Illyrians, they had decapitated them. With Corcyra lost, the Illyrian defensive line shattered like glass. The Roman legions disembarked and advanced northward, acting less like an army and more like an elemental force. City after city, Epidamnos, Apollonia, Issa, flung open their gates, eager to distance themselves from the pirate queen. The Romans accepted their surrenders and continued their advance, pushing Teuta further into the untamed interior. Teuta herself retreated to the fortress of Rhizon, nestled deep within the labyrinthine bay of Kotor. It was a natural stronghold, but she found herself isolated. Her allies had defected, her fleet was dispersed, and her trusted general was now guiding the Roman legions to her doorstep. In 228 BC, she capitulated. The peace treaty was deeply humiliating. Teuta was compelled to relinquish her claims to the Greek cities, pay a crippling tribute, and, most devastatingly, accept limitations on her navy, with no more than 2 unarmed Illyrian ships permitted to sail south of Lissus. The pirate empire was effectively grounded. Rome declared victory, withdrew its legions, and sailed home, believing the Illyrian problem resolved. They left Demetrius of Pharus in charge, a puppet intended to oversee the Adriatic. Yet, they had overlooked a fundamental principle of managing wild animals. A wolf that bites its master once will inevitably do so again. Demetrius harbored no desire to be a mere puppet. He aspired to be a king, and as Rome turned its attention to a new threat emerging from Carthage, the traitor began to sharpen his knives. History rarely presents a flawless villain, but Demetrius of Pharus comes close. He was the ultimate survivor, a man who viewed loyalty as a currency to be expended, not hoarded. While Rome was paralyzed by the alarming news that a Carthaginian general named Hannibal was marching war elephants towards the Alps, Demetrius deemed the opportune moment had arrived to cash in his chips. He had been appointed by the Senate to maintain peace in the Adriatic, but instead he transformed it into his personal dominion. He gambled that Rome, preoccupied with the existential threat of Carthage, would overlook a few transgressions. Demetrius tore up the peace treaty of 228 BC. He not only crossed the forbidden line of Lissus, but sailed past it with 50 warships, raiding the Cyclades and terrorizing Rome's allies in Greece. His ambitions extended beyond mere piracy. To solidify his position, he married into the royal family of Macedon, forging an alliance with King Philip V. This represented Rome's worst-case scenario materialized, a nexus between the volatile naval power of the Illyrians and the disciplined phalanxes of the East. Demetrius was no longer just a pirate. He was a geopolitical strategist, constructing an anti-Roman coalition. The Second Illyrian War was Rome's desperate attempt to secure its rear before its homeland was engulfed. The Senate understood the critical imperative of neutralizing Demetrius's threat to their Adriatic supply lines, which could cripple their efforts against Hannibal in Italy. They dispatched Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a consul renowned for his grim efficiency, to apprehend the traitor. The campaign was a masterclass in Roman siege warfare. In a single week, the formidable fortress of Dimal was stormed and captured. The swiftness of the Roman advance caught Demetrius entirely by surprise. He retreated to his ancestral island of Pharos, confident in his fortifications. However, the Romans eschewed a protracted siege. They executed a feigned landing to draw Demetrius's troops out of the city, then ambushed them from the rear with a concealed force. Caught in a pincer movement, the self-proclaimed king of the Adriatic witnessed his army disintegrate. True to his nature, however, Demetrius did not perish with his soldiers. While his men were being slaughtered, he slipped away to a waiting vessel and fled to the court of Philip V in Macedon. Rome had once again triumphed, securing the Adriatic just in time to confront Hannibal. Yet, the victory remained incomplete. By allowing Demetrius to escape, they had inadvertently allowed a virulent contagion to spread. Demetrius would spend the remainder of his life subtly influencing the Macedonian king, urging Philip to attack Rome during its period of greatest vulnerability. The Illyrian pirate had become a kingmaker, and his machinations would draw Rome into decades of brutal conflict in the east. The serpent had been flushed from the undergrowth, only to find a larger garden in which to infest. Fast forward 50 years to 168 BC. The world had transformed. Rome was no longer merely a powerful republic, it was the apex predator of the Mediterranean. Yet, in the Illyrian capital of Scudra, a new king named Gentius was poised to repeat the same age-old error. The Third Illyrian War was not instigated by ambition, but by a charlatan. The king of Macedon, Perseus, was desperately seeking allies against the Roman juggernaut. He identified Gentius as a useful pawn. Perseus offered the Illyrian king a staggering sum of 300 talents of silver to defect and attack Rome. The ensuing negotiation represents one of ancient history's most tragicomic episodes. Gentius, wary of unsubstantiated promises, demanded to see the money firsthand. Perseus's envoys duly transported the silver to Illyria, allowing Gentius to affix his royal seal to the wax preserving the treasure. Assured that the fortune was his, Gentius committed the singular act that would render his betrayal irrevocable. He arrested 2 Roman ambassadors and imprisoned them. This was the point of no return. However, the moment news of the arrests reached Macedon, Perseus rescinded his offer. He ordered the silver bearers to return with the money. His reasoning was that Gentius was now already at war with Rome, and thus required no further incentive to fight. Gentius had bartered his kingdom for a fortune he never received. The Roman response was terrifyingly swift. The Senate dispatched not a consul this time, but a praetor named Anicius Gallus. Anicius eschewed complex maneuvers, launching a blitzkrieg that would impress modern military commanders. The entire war lasted a mere 30 days. Let that sink in. The Illyrian kingdom, which had terrorized the Adriatic for a century, was dismantled within a single month. Gentius retreated behind the formidable Cyclopean walls of Scudra, hoping to withstand a siege. But his heart was not in it. His army was demoralized, his treasury was depleted, and the Roman legions were relentless. The conclusion was pathetic rather than heroic. Gentius requested a 3-day truce to contemplate his options, likely hoping for the miraculous arrival of a relief army. He spent those 3 days in anxious anticipation, undoubtedly drinking heavily and scanning the horizon. No aid appeared. When the truce expired, he did not sally forth for a glorious last stand. Instead, he emerged from the gates, fell to his knees in the dust before the Roman praetor, and pleaded for his life. Rome showed no mercy. The kingdom was dissolved. Gentius and his entire family were shackled and paraded through the streets of Rome in Anicius's triumph. As the throngs of people erupted in cheers at the sight of their captured king in manacles, the independent past of Illyria reached a sorrowful conclusion. The dominion of the sea raiders had been annihilated. However, for the ordinary populace left behind in the Balkan region, the true suffering was only just commencing. The conflict had ended, but the systematic subjugation was merely beginning. When the legions retreated to their homeland, they left behind a menace far more insidious than armed soldiers: the administrators. Rome did not assimilate Illyria to establish educational institutions or construct thoroughfares. Their objective was to plunder it. The Senate enacted their favored geopolitical strategy, divide et impera, which translates to divide and rule. The formerly unified kingdom was surgically partitioned into 3 distinct, self-governing territories. It was a deliberate amputation. Rome prohibited intermarriage and any form of commerce between these sectors. If you resided in the northern part of Illyria, your relative in the south might as well have resided on a different planet. The overarching aim was to dismantle the national identity that had fostered monarchs like Agron and queens like Teuta. Yet, the fragmentation of governance was merely a prelude. The primary objective was economic exploitation. The Roman forces arrived with an insatiable craving for silver, and the ancient Balkans possessed abundant reserves. To facilitate this acquisition, the Senate bypassed governmental appointees and instead contracted private consortiums, known as the publicani, to manage tax collection and oversee the mining operations. These entities functioned as the venture capitalists of antiquity, albeit armed with weaponry. They submitted bids for these contracts in Rome, remitting payment to the state in advance, which meant that any silver extracted from the Illyrian populace beyond this initial payment represented pure profit. The outcome was a system of unspeakable brutality on an industrial scale. The Roman economy in its conquered territories was propelled by a mechanism that consumed human lives. Countless Illyrian warriors, once the proud rulers of the Adriatic coast, were compelled into the abyssal, suffocating depths of the silver mines. The working conditions amounted to a slow death sentence. The subterranean passages were cramped, devoid of ventilation, and illuminated solely by flickering oil lamps that depleted the meager oxygen supply. Miners endured shifts that stretched for days, relentlessly hacking at the rock while involuntarily inhaling silica dust that calcified their lungs. Even if the rock did not claim their lives, the sheer barbarity surely would. The publicani employed private security detachments who enforced quotas through the application of whips and bludgeons. There was no accountability. Human rights were non-existent. The sole imperative was the quota. The riches extracted from these mineral-rich hills financed the construction of Roman streets and funded the gladiatorial spectacles that appeased the masses. Conversely, back in Illyria, the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, felt like a suffocating shroud. The publicani seized land, confiscated livestock, and imposed taxes on every conceivable aspect of life, from the number of supporting columns on a dwelling to the number of enslaved individuals an owner possessed. Inability to meet these demands rendered individuals themselves a commodity. For over a century, the pressure mounted. The Illyrians were subjugated, fragmented, and enslaved, but their spirit remained unbroken. Concealed from Roman eyes, within secluded mountain passes and dense forests where Roman tax collectors feared to tread, the ancient narratives persisted. The remembrance of King Agron and the liberty of the sea never faded. It went underground. Rome believed it was governing a mere province. In truth, it was precariously balanced atop a powder keg, with the fuse steadily burning toward the most cataclysmic upheaval the empire would ever confront. By the year 6 AD, the Roman Republic had transformed into an empire, with the first emperor Augustus at its helm. The world appeared to be in a state of equilibrium. However, in the mountainous regions of Illyria, the pressure cooker was poised to erupt. The catalyst was not an act of aggression or the rebellion of an enslaved person, but rather a recruitment drive. Rome was orchestrating a vast military expedition into Germany and urgently required manpower to bolster its ranks. They turned to their battle-hardened subjects in the Balkans, demanding a conscription of auxiliary troops. The Illyrians assembled as commanded. They stood in formation, wielding Roman-issued blades, clad in Roman armor, and trained in Roman military strategies. Yet, as they observed the recruiting officers issuing commands, a perilous realization spread through the ranks. We are equipped, we are trained, and we outnumber them. The uprising commenced not with a murmur, but with a resounding roar. Spearheaded by a chieftain named Bato the Diocletian, the Illyrians turned their armaments upon their own officers. Within mere days, the revolt disseminated with the speed of a wildfire in a parched landscape. Another leader, Bato of the Bruci, joined the burgeoning cause. The two Batos united the tribes in a manner that neither Agron nor Teuta had ever achieved. This became known as the Bellum Batonianum, or the War of the Batos. This was no distant frontier skirmish. It represented an existential threat. The insurgents were not merely defending their homelands, they were advancing upon Italy itself. A wave of panic washed over Rome. For the first time in centuries, the Senate convened under the shadow of terror. Emperor Augustus, typically a picture of composed fortitude, addressed the Senate, declaring that without immediate, decisive action, the enemy could be within striking distance of Rome in a mere 10 days. The empire was plunged into a state of complete mobilization. Rome depleted its provincial garrisons. Thousands of enslaved individuals were granted their freedom solely to fill the ranks of the military. The future emperor, Tiberius, was recalled from the German front to lead the defensive operations. What ensued was the most savage conflict Rome would endure until the barbarian incursions centuries hence. Rome ultimately marshaled 15 legions, comprising more than half of its total military strength, augmented by an equal number of auxiliary forces. This represented a deployment of nearly 200,000 men, tasked with subduing a territory no larger than modern-day Bosnia. The war raged for 3 arduous years. The Illyrians fought with the ferocity of those aware that this was their final opportunity. They expertly utilized the challenging terrain, luring the heavily armored Roman columns into mountain ambushes and severing their logistical routes. Unable to achieve victory through direct engagement, Rome resorted to starvation tactics. Tiberius implemented a scorched earth policy, razing every village, slaughtering every herd of cattle, and eradicating every crop. Finally, in 9 AD, Bato the Ditiot surrendered at the fortress of Andetrium. When Tiberius inquired as to why his people had revolted with such extreme ferocity, Bato delivered one of history's most poignant pronouncements. "You Romans are to blame, for you send as guardians of your flocks not dogs or shepherds, but wolves." Although the uprising was quelled, the cost was astronomical. The Illyrians had conclusively demonstrated their status as the most formidable combatants in the known world. Rome, ever the pragmatist, concluded that if they could not extinguish this defiant spirit, they would co-opt it. 2 centuries after Bato's revolt, the Roman Empire was not dominating the world, it was being consumed from within. This marked the crisis of the 3rd century, a 50-year ordeal during which Rome grappled with civil strife, widespread pestilence, economic collapse, and invasions on all frontiers. The decadent, languid elites of the Senate proved impotent to staunch the hemorrhaging. The empire had fractured into 3 disparate segments, and Rome's demise seemed inevitable. However, salvation did not emerge from the noble lineages of Italy. It originated from the rugged limestone hills of the ancient Balkans. Following the Great Revolt, Rome had learned a crucial lesson. Rather than confronting the Illyrians, they began to enlist them. The legions increasingly comprised men from Dalmatia and Pannonia, individuals who had grown up on horseback, revered martial deities, and viewed conflict as an intrinsic aspect of existence. By the middle of the 3rd century, the Roman army had effectively become a barbarian force. And since the military now held the power to select the emperor, the reins of power had, in essence, passed to the so-called barbarians. Enter Aurelian. Born into a humble peasant family in Iria, he ascended through the military ranks not by inherited privilege, but by the sheer volume of adversaries he vanquished. His soldiers referred to him as manu amatus, meaning hand on hilt, as he was perpetually armed. Upon assuming the imperial purple in 270 AD, he inherited a decaying entity. The empire was shattered. The Goths were plundering the northern territories. Queen Zenobia of Palmyra had seized the affluent eastern provinces, and a secessionist Gallic empire controlled the west. Aurelian did not engage in negotiations, he commenced decisive action. In a swift, decisive campaign spanning a mere 5 years, he accomplished the seemingly impossible. He crushed the Goths. He advanced eastward, annihilating Zenobia's armies in the Syrian desert. He then turned westward, compelling the Gallic usurpers to submit. He painstakingly reconnected the fractured territories of the empire with an iron resolve. Upon his return to Rome, the Senate, comprising descendants of those who had once disdained Queen Teuta, had no recourse but to bow before this unpretentious soldier. They bestowed upon him the title Restitutor Orbis, or Restorer of the World. Aurelian's reign was merely the beginning. He was succeeded by Emperor Diocletian, another Illyrian, who fundamentally restructured the empire, ensuring its survival for an additional millennium. The irony is profound. The very people Rome had endeavored to obliterate during the wars of subjugation had become the sole force capable of preserving the concept of Rome. The Illyrians did not merely conquer the empire from within, they became the empire. The wolves had transformed into the shepherds. Without their intervention, the beacon of Western civilization would have been extinguished centuries earlier. The ultimate triumph of the Illyrians was not etched in blood, but solidified in stone. And it did not transpire in Rome. In the early 4th century, Constantine the Great, born in Nisus, a city deep within the heart of Illyrian territory, made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of human history. He determined that Rome, the city of the Seven Hills, was no longer deserving of its status as the world's capital. He turned his gaze eastward. He established a new Rome on the Bosphorus, a metropolis that would bear his name, Constantinople. This represented the ultimate subversion. The Illyrian emperors did not merely rescue the empire, they commandeered it. They shifted the center of power away from the Italian aristocracy, who had once branded them as pirates, and relocated it to their own domain. The subsequent Byzantine Empire, which preserved the flame of classical civilization for an additional 1,000 years, while Western Europe descended into the Dark Ages, was constructed upon foundations established by Illyrian pragmatism and martial prowess. Even Justinian the Great, the emperor responsible for the construction of the Hagia Sophia and the codification of laws that still form the basis of modern legal systems, was born a peasant in the Illyrian region of Dardania. So, what became of the Illyrian people themselves? Did they simply vanish? History is frequently penned by the victors, and when the Slavs swept into the Balkans during the 6th and 7th centuries, the Illyrian name gradually receded from maps. However, a people who had withstood the Greeks, the Celts, and the Romans do not simply cease to exist. Linguists and historians trace a direct lineage from the ancient Illyrians to the contemporary Albanian people. The Albanian language represents a unique branch on the Indo-European linguistic tree, a living relic that likely preserves the vernacular of the tribes who once defied the legions in the lofty mountains of Albania and Kosovo. The traditions of the clan, the stringent code of honor known as the Kanun, and the unyielding spirit of independence echo the era of Queen Teuta and King Agron. The narrative of the Illyrians is the quintessential underdog epic. They commenced as Rome's adversaries, the other, the barbarian, the pirate. They were pursued, vanquished, divided, and subjugated. Yet, they resolutely refused to be erased. They infiltrated the very apparatus that sought their destruction, ascended to the pinnacle of global power, and steered the vessel of civilization through its most perilous tempest. When Lucius Cornelius sneered at Queen Teuta on that fateful day in 230 BC, he perceived a barbarian. He could not have fathomed that he was gazing upon the progenitors of Rome's future saviors. The eagle may have established its dominion in Italy, but for centuries, its wings were sustained by the sons of Iria. If you found this in-depth exploration of the lost empire of the Adriatic engaging, kindly express your appreciation by liking and subscribing. This signals to the algorithm that historical narratives hold value. I am eager to hear your perspectives in the comments section. Do you believe Rome would have endured without the soldier emperors, or was the empire destined for collapse regardless? Let us engage in a discussion below. Until our next encounter, continue seeking truth within the obscured corners of history.